I'm your host, Hannah, today, and I am here with one of my very best and dearest friends, Kristen Files. We have known each other for, oh goodness, over 2 decades now. We had kids together, raised families together, lived life. Kristen has been with me through thick and thin. She was there with me through kind of those dark days after my first husband died, and just really walked through the journey of life together. It's been amazing to have her as a great friend. So I'm so excited to have Kristen here today. I have watched Kristen throughout these years of knowing her and just been amazed by her as she has just transformed her life throughout the decades that I've known her. She's a lifelong learner and is always exploring new options for wellness. Kristen is one of the most dedicated and disciplined people I know, as she she learns these new ways to take care of herself and her family. And I'm so excited to kind of bring some of her knowledge to you guys today. Kristen is a functional nutritional therapy practitioner, a master restorative wellness practitioner, and board certified in holistic nutrition. She is the owner of Forest Creek Wellness. That's a functional nutrition practice just north of Austin, Texas. Kristen is also one of my favorite foodie friends. We always are finding fun
hmm
places to eat whenever I'm with her. She's got a new restaurant for me to try out, and it's always been amazing. She is a homeschooling mama of four and a classical educator. Kristen is just passionate about using real food as medicine and educating other moms to do the same thing for themselves and their families. She supports women who are exhausted to reconnect with and nourish their bodies and their families. So, Kristen, I'm so excited to have you here on our podcast today. Welcome.
Thank you
How are
for
you doing
having
this
me. I'm
morning?
super excited to be here. I'm excited to see this new endeavor that you're doing as well.
It's exciting times.
Yes.
All right. So, for today, it's going to touch on just some kind of holistic wellness things. For the month of October, one of our focuses is on domestic violence and survivorship of that. And I wanted to kind of address one of the physical aspects of that, which is kind of, and it doesn't even just have to apply to domestic abuse surviving that situation. Stress can affect us in so many different ways. So we're going to talk about kind of how stress affects us and our adrenal system, and maybe what some of those symptoms are like. That can be, like I said, anything from coming out of a very stressful situation that you may have been in for years to dealing with profound grief and loss like I did after losing my first husband, to just living life daily and trying to, all the stressors of taking care of kids and raising families and trying to pay the bills and all the things, and at the same time not maybe getting the right food, the right sleep, the right all the different things, and we
hmm
just find ourselves in this stressed fight or flight situation, which can have some pretty serious or significant impacts on our body and symptoms that we're having that can really impact our daily lives. So, real quick, I know I kind of threw a lot at you, but Kristen, tell me a little bit more about yourself and your background and kind of how you got into what you do.
Yeah. You had already talked about being a wife and a homeschooling mother of four, and that alone is just stressful. And then you add in different things, and it can take a toll on your health. I've been in the functional wellness space for about 13 years. So since my fourth child was born. So she's kind of her age is how long I've been in this. And things started turning around after I discovered functional wellness with her. So I started self educating because I had an alphabet soup of symptoms and diagnoses. So things like fibromyalgia, interstitial cystitis, Hashimoto's thyroid, chronic fatigue syndrome. And when I would go to the doctor, all they would want to do is give me antidepressants. And I remember, very clearly pleading with one doctor and saying, this isn't depression. There's something wrong with me. I feel like half a person. And he would say, that's what depression is. And here's your
Mm,
prescription. And nothing ever changed.
yeah.
So eventually I decided to just kind of go out on my own journey. And then there was all this like crazy conflicting information out there. So at that point, it's like, okay, what is the right thing? What is the wrong thing? And I started self testing. I found a functional doctor partway through there, and he helped me quite a lot. I figured out I had a systemic yeast infection that was the top 10% of worst cases he'd ever seen. So we worked on that. And it was just a little bit of back and forth. So I decided I needed some training. And that's when I chose to get formal education, first through the Nutritional Therapy Association as a functional nutritional therapy practitioner. And then I went on to do lab testing through Master Restorative Wellness Solutions, and then some other certifications. And I opened up a brick and mortar practice about 6 years ago. So now I'm seeing clients both in person and online. And the thing is when I was learning, we didn't have a whole lot of resources because the internet wasn't really as big of a thing back then. And so you had, a few blogs and then just some books. So you had to read books to, get to the heart of anything. And now the exact opposite is the issue. And there's this plethora of information all over online, social media. Everybody's contradicting each other. And so it can get kind of crazy. And I just decided to start this, one, it sort of happened organically, but two, just to cut through the noise and help people to really simplify and specifically to work with their lifestyle. And adrenal health is my main focus because of this, the stress aspect that you articulated. We are faced with stress, just living in this culture, in this society, but then you throw in life experiences, traumas, dysfunctional families, grief, all kinds of things, and that can escalate. And I think after the last 3 years, all of us in one way or another have some sort of stress that we're dealing with coming out of that.
It has been an extraordinary couple of years.
Yes.
Okay. So, we've kind of been throwing around that adrenal, phrase that, or you might have heard adrenal fatigue or things like that. That's kind of a phrase that we use in holistic wellness. But let's just real quick touch on the very basics. What are the adrenals and where are they located? What do they do in our body?
Okay, so the adrenals are two little glands and they sit just above your kidneys. And that just kind of the name because it's adrenal and renal is your kidneys and these are right next to it. And they govern your fight or flight hormone response. So any kind of stress response, they help govern that. They help govern your blood sugar response and your sex hormone response. And then also like your blood pressure and different, vital system processes.
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. You listed off those different things. So for people who are struggling with adrenal system regulation, perhaps some of those symptoms what does that look like for someone who's, thinking maybe I'm dealing with that, which you can touch on some of those, but I know that, fatigue is obviously the first one that we always hear about, that brain fog or like, I'm just tired even though I slept through the night, or maybe not. Cause I think a lot of us, and in my practice, I have a lot of women who are like, I wake up between 2 and 4 a.m. and my mind just goes, right. And they can't sleep. Right. So a little bit of both of those things. I think, of course, heightened anxiety and being stressed by situations that maybe feel like we should be able to manage, but we can't. It's that heightened level of anxiety and that stress response. And then like cravings, I think is another one that I hear a lot about, like cravings for salty or sugary foods. I hear that a lot from different women in my practice. And then, like you said, the blood pressure, I've always found that interesting because it can be that low blood pressure, that orthostatic hypotension, right? Like when we'll mention, like if I stand up too fast, everything goes kind of black for a second.
Yes.
I feel a little bit lightheaded. And that can actually be attributed to adrenal system dysregulation. I thought that was really interesting. And then like muscle aches and muscle weaknesses and other things, digestive issues, right? I think that's another one that we talked about before. Did I miss any other symptoms? What other symptoms did I not touch on?
Yeah. And so I think the thing really to note is that the symptoms of adrenal dysregulation can be very varied because it's stress that is causing your adrenals to fire. And stress can be external, but it can also be internal. So if you have digestive issues, then those are stressful in the body and can cause adrenal issues. So it looks very broad and very varied. And I don't know if you want to get into patterns. We can get into like what certain patterns look like and, what point you are in the spectrum. But other things that come to mind, like the hallmark symptoms would be things that you said. And in my mind, that exhaustion and overwhelm. So you feel physically tired, mentally tired, everything is hard to do. You're lacking motivation. And then also just overwhelmed because your brain is not functioning at the rate that it should.
It's kind of that
So those would be
wired
my,
but
like, yeah,
tired.
like my top tier. Yes. Uh-huh.
Hmm.
And
Like super
so
anxious
other things.
but exhausted.
Mhm. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Like, you need to go, but you can't.
Right.
um, and so other things that are maybe a little bit lesser known that are more specific to the adrenals really are vision issues. So not
Mm,
necessarily blurred vision, but having a sensitivity to light. So you can't go outside without having sunglasses. And if
yeah.
you look at really old pictures of just society, like people on the beach, people didn't wear sunglasses all the time.
Yeah.
And that's kind of an interesting, the light through the eyes is a very interesting one, because if you're, if you have adrenal dysregulation, you're going to be sensitive to light, but then also wearing sunglasses all the time and never getting natural light through your eyes can kind of exacerbate adrenal issues. So
I know that
it's
was a
very
big symptom
interesting.
for me.
Yeah.
Like I can tell like when I'm more stressed and not in a good
Hmm.
space, I have to wear sunglasses every like I cannot tolerate going out in the sun.
Yeah.
And I remember when I learned
Yeah.
that, I was so surprised. I was like, "Oh my gosh," but it made sense, right? And
Uh-huh.
I can tell like one of the ways I kind of monitor my own self is like if I can go out in the sun without having to grab my
Mhm.
sunglasses or, something to shade my eyes, I can really tell a difference with that. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and the mechanism is actually really fascinating too, because the adrenals will kind of govern the constriction of your pupil, and so you can actually shine a light in your eye, and you can see that your eye will not hold that constriction. So that's why you're sensitive to light. And it's
Yeah.
very fun to watch. It's fun to watch that process. Another one is not being able to hold like alignment. So pain
Mm,
specifically in the feet and the calves. So like shin splints, plantar fasciitis,
hmm.
those can often, if you've worked and worked and worked on it, you just don't know what's wrong. That can be related. Having uneven legs can often be related, because the adrenals help to keep all those things in the body in alignment. And when you're in a stress state, it's not as important. The priority is to just get away from whatever your situation is, right? And so that's on back burner. So if you go to the chiropractor all the time and you just can't hold it, and you feel like you need to go every week, or you can't function, then that's
Hmm.
often an adrenal
Not
issue.
improving.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. And then weight. So especially that like spare tire or muffin top around the middle is related to adrenal issues.
Hmm.
So I mean, obviously, you
Cortisol
could have
levels,
all over.
right?
You could have that all over weight, but that spare tire around the middle is like a cortisol weight. Yes.
Yeah.
You mentioned cravings, immune issues, so just being sick all the time or not resilient to things. I think a lot of times, like moms, the act of just giving birth in general is kind of exhausting and
Hmm.
depleting on the body. And so, and then you're nursing or whatever, you're just trying to function. And then their kids go to school and they're like, oh, I'm always sick because my child is bringing this thing home from, to me. And that may not be the case. It may be that you have this dysregulation. And if you were at a place where you were in balance, you might not be struggling all the time. You would have some more resiliency there.
Yeah.
And then lastly, like off the top of my head list is reproductive dysfunction. So if you're struggling with
Yeah.
miscarriages, repeated miscarriages, infertility, things like that, that is related to the adrenals, just because of their, articulation with the endocrine system and the sex hormones.
Right.
Hmm.
Hormones play are such a complex thing, but they really do
Hmm.
run pretty like all the functions of our body, including, like you said, fertility.
Hmm.
Um, okay, so yeah, there's a lot of things there, and I know, and some of them can be, attributed to other disease processes or whatever, and I get that. But I do, I think if you kind of address them all, you can start to touch on things,
Yeah.
and things can improve, right? Um,
Yeah.
So, can adrenal fatigue be the root cause of other health issues, or is it kind of the other way around? Like, which one comes first, like adrenal fatigue, or is it other, like possibly other processes that can cause the adrenal fatigue, or a bit of both?
I think it kind of depends on the person and their situation. And so to me, it helps to kind of understand the process of how the adrenals are being signaled and how they work, to
Hmm.
understand where that dysregulation can come in. And so the adrenals, and really this could apply to any organ, but the adrenals do not work alone. We have all these complex systems in the body. And so
Yeah.
we have this term adrenal fatigue, which I think is pretty accurate because we're dealing with adrenals and you feel fatigued. So it's a great description of what you're feeling, but it's not really accurate in the way that things are going on in the body. And so a more accurate term that has come up is HPA axis dysregulation.
Yeah.
And so that sounds like a mouthful, but we'll try to break it down. And so your HPA is your hypothalamus and your pituitary, little organs or glands in the brain, and then your adrenals. And so they form an axis, a complex with one another in their signaling. So in a normal function, you'll have a stressor come in. And so your hypothalamus is just kind of watching, he's monitoring the body, and a stressor will come in, and the hypothalamus will alert the pituitary to send a message to the adrenal glands to produce whatever hormone is needed, but usually cortisol in the case of stress, right? And so you have a stressor come in, the hypothalamus sees it, tells the pituitary to signal function, the adrenals put out whatever needs to be put out. So that's a good normal process, and that's how we're supposed to work. But what happens is we get an alarm signal from the amygdala, which is your alarm system in the brain, and it will bypass that normal process and tell the adrenals to fire on their own. And so this is what we know of as like that adrenaline response,
Mm-hmm.
where you're on high alert and you're lifting the proverbial car off the
The
baby and you're
fight or
just going,
flight.
going. Yeah.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
you're releasing adrenaline, but you're also releasing cortisol. And the hypothalamus will downregulate if you're constantly circling these things. So if you were in a place of trauma or just chronic stress, then you're bypassing the normal system, telling the adrenals to fire, and everything else can downregulate because of that mechanism. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so this is very good in normal function, but the problem is the way our society is set up is that we're chronically firing, right? So if we had these alarm situations just intermittently, the body would rest, recover, recuperate, and get over it. But to us, everything is sort of an alarm. Like if you're on the road and everybody's super crazy now, you're like having to swerve from people all the time. That's an alarm. Fighting with your spouse is an alarm. Dealing with a boss is an alarm.
Mm-hmm.
Just even some of the stuff coming through on the internet, we're just constantly being bombarded with messaging, right? That has us in this
Mm-hmm.
frequent alarm state. And so it's just causing dysregulation everywhere.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, the adrenals can certainly be a root cause. But then if there's other situations going on, say your digestion is not functioning properly and you have, like I had, that yeast overgrowth, then that can be what's causing that chronic stress. So which one is the root? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, maybe digestion, but it could be either. And so that's where it's helpful to work with a practitioner to get down to where are you? What is
Yeah.
your root cause? Is it the adrenals? But for a lot of people, it is. And then I would say, like, even working with clients, if the adrenals aren't your root cause, you still need to take care of them because of the stress that you're in. So I would still almost always address adrenal function no matter
Right.
what I'm working on with somebody.
Supporting that system to work
Mm-hmm.
properly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Because I mean, life is hard, right? And we're all going to go through stressful and
Mm-hmm.
hard situations. So I think learning ways to help support our wellness in that is going to be key, even if we aren't necessarily in like a horrible, stressful, traumatic, situation necessarily in life. Life in general can be tough, right? So we're always going to have to figure out how to ways to work with that, and so like supporting ourselves is going to be important.
Right. And then, like, as a very tangible example, my kids were just in a serious car accident and
Yeah.
two of them had concussions. And part of their concussion protocol is adrenal support because of the stress that happened. So you could say the root cause wasn't necessarily the adrenals, but it is part of their recovery. I don't know if that helps simplify.
Okay. So we've talked a lot about the symptoms and whatnot. And you mentioned like working with a provider. I think that's really important as we're trying to, especially with complex, situations. We talked about the symptoms and kind of how you can maybe identify it in yourself if that's something that you're struggling with. But are there ways to like labs to request or things that they can see like to specifically like check different levels to see if your adrenals are functioning properly?
Sure, yes. So there are several things that you can do. I think one of the things that is important to note just before getting into labs, like you can do a lab, an adrenal salivary. And so
Mhm.
that's going to be probably the most accurate test that there is. But to preface that, one thing to note about your adrenals is that they don't have this static, like even level. They
Mm,
have a fluctuating level throughout the day.
right.
So your adrenal output is your highest in the morning. And so you have this cortisol awakening response, and you should have this bump in cortisol when you about 30 minutes after you wake up. And so you'll peak and then you'll gradually taper down throughout the day. And so that's called the diurnal rhythm. And when you do the salivary cortisol, you want to make sure that you're doing a test where you're testing the rhythm throughout the day. Because a lot of, as doctors, as conventional doctors are getting a little bit more in the know, they might run one test, like just take one sample, but that's not entirely accurate. What
It's
is
not
your
an
rhythm
accurate
throughout
picture.
the day?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you want to make sure when you do that salivary cortisol that you have the diurnal rhythm throughout the day. And so you could do just a cortisol test, or you could do something like a Dutch test, which has the dried urine, but it's just tracking patterns over time. And so those are best to use. I don't always recommend just, hey, asking for a test because they're not always accurate because,
Hmm.
a lot of
It could be a
your
spot
cortisol
check or
isn't circulating. Yeah. So
yeah,
you have to take
exactly.
it in context with your overall symptoms for sure.
Yeah.
You could do a hair test, and just based on your mineral excretion, you could draw some really important conclusions on adrenal production and, how you're oxidizing things or metabolizing things. Blood chemistry, you could use a couple of the markers on there. It's not really a good indicator of adrenal function, but it could clue you in like, hey, that may be a problem. So you could dig deeper in that area, especially like looking at things like potassium and alkaline phosphatase. Um, Thyroid issues. So, a thyroid, you have that HPA axis that we talked about, but that HP has many axes. And so you have your HPT, which is hypothalamus pituitary thyroid, and your HPG, which is hypothalamus pituitary gonad, which is your reproductive organs.
Hmm.
And so if any of those is off, then it can be a clue that adrenal is dysregulated. And then there's just like some self tests you can do. So you mentioned the blood pressure, and you can do that postural hypotension. So,
Mm-hmm.
take your blood pressure resting, like sitting, laying down, and then stand up. And if your blood pressure drops, that's a sign that you might have adrenal dysfunction. Or the pupil test that we mentioned earlier. You can do a breath test. So that this is really interesting. If you would what you would do is you would take like a big deep inhale and a big exhale, and then take a normal inhale and a normal exhale and hold your breath. So you're holding your breath with your lungs empty without anything in there,
Hmm.
and just see how far you can get. And you should be able to hold your breath for like 40 to 60 seconds. And if you have adrenal dysregulation, that will not be the case. So I could hold my breath for like 3 when
Yeah,
I
I
first
know I did that too, and I
started.
was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
something's off," because I could not. It was like I could not hold my
Yeah.
breath. I was like, "Yeah, there's something definitely going on there."
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really interesting
Yeah.
one to do on yourself because it kind of gives you a pretty quick look at things. So yeah,
Yeah,
I agree.
it's fascinating. And you can actually kind of build up resiliency using
Hmm.
that test, like just working out your adrenal glands. But it's
Yeah.
very humbling because you're like, oh, I can hold
Yeah.
my breath. No, I can't. And people with adrenal issues, like that was something that I used to have. Like I would have very shallow breathing. And so if you have very shallow breathing, then you're just not getting proper oxygenation throughout your body, which will cause you to feel very, very tired.
Yep.
And so those things are related. And then the other last thing I'm thinking of is like leg length. So if you have different length legs, it used to be that chiropractors would see that and they would give you a like something to put in your shoe to keep you even, but that's often an adrenal thing. And so I use
Mm.
that in my office. I do muscle testing. And if the leg length is off, we'll kind of support the adrenal glands and then automatically they will shift into alignment. It's pretty amazing.
All right. So we've identified some of the symptoms, talked about kind of the basics of it. What are some ways that someone can improve their adrenal health starting at home with like lifestyle changes and things like that, and all the way up
Mm-hmm.
to like, finding a provider and whatnot?
Right. So the first thing I say is to always stop fueling the fire. Like you want to put the brakes on your stress response and not continue adding to it.
Hmm.
So very simple things like identifying toxins in your diet, in your physical environment and removing those. And I think a lot of things, or one of the things that a lot of women don't know is that our cosmetics and our beauty care products, a lot of them are very
Yes.
toxic and very stressful to the body. And
Yeah.
fragrances and air fresheners and things like that. So as much as you can switch that over to natural, that would be great.
Huge.
And you don't have to do everything at once. I know a lot of these things, like when you get into this functional health, functional nutrition, it can seem overwhelming.
Yeah.
But I always tell people to like just do one thing at a time, like use up what you have and then replace it with
With
something
a
that
clean product.
is, yeah, a
Yeah,
clean product.
exactly.
And the
That's how I
environmental
did it.
working group, yes, yeah, me too. You know that. The environmental working group has a really good app, Skin Deep, and so you can look at that to look at your ingredients and have a scale of what's good and
I have
bad.
that app on my phone.
Hmm. Yeah, it's super useful. Nutrition, so things like switching to natural sugars and then, lowering your sugar burden altogether. And I think just as important as sugars would be looking at your fats. So we have a lot of toxic vegetable fats in our society, and those
Hmm.
are very
Seed
detrimental
oils.
to the body. All the seed
Yeah.
oils. So you want to do things like animal fats and ghee and butter and olive oil is actually one of the seed oils that is good for you, but you shouldn't be heating it. So, like, you'll see
Right.
recipes where it says to fry in olive oil, and you should not do
Yeah.
that.
Never ever.
Hmm. Yeah, and every single cell in your body is made out of fat. So, if your fats are of the wrong kind and quantity, then you're going to just be impaired altogether. Your body's going to be stressed. Identifying like stressors in your life, like whether that's schedule or maybe relationships,
Mm.
and the need to like set boundaries or get out of certain situations is going to be
Yeah.
really important. And then also your attitude. So there's a whole, we could talk about like German new medicine and how your emotions affect your physical health and certain glands in organs in particular. And so, like, we can't escape emotions, but learning to deal with them in a proper way and then shifting on how we perceive things. So,
Yes.
in my classes, one of the things that we often address is like, I'm I'm choosing to take care of myself. I'm not doing this, it's like not suffering, right? We're spinning how we perceive things,
Yep.
and
Changing
that
that
will help.
perception. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, so those are very big, broad, like overarching. You could get a little bit more specific into those, each one of them. Um, also, I think really sleep is important. And so I know that's hard, especially when you have young children.
Hmm.
Um,
Babies are not conducive to good sleep
yeah, it's really hard. But,
for the most
like when
part.
it,
For the most part.
yes. Yeah, but whatever you can do to get baby to sleep so that you can sleep, and if you need to add in some support in there, it's really important to get good sleep because that's when your body primarily detoxifies the brain.
Yeah.
And so that's really good for that hypothalamus pituitary and the good functioning and signaling for adrenal health. And then just simple things like grounding, getting your feet on the ground. It is absolutely amazing. Like God has given us every single thing we need for healing. So we can add outside things, but there's a lot of just simple free things that you can do. And so getting morning sunlight into your eyes and sunset light into your eyes will help to support your circadian rhythm, which will help with the sleep and which will help with that cortisol rhythm that we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
What
have a
about
whole list of more,
exercise or
but I feel like that's
supplements?
enough. Exercise is interesting. So I kind of have my own personal take on this. You'll see some people that are like, you have to exercise for detoxification and for good blood flow and for all this stuff. And it's really healthy for you. But people who are in major dysregulation, exercise can absolutely tank them.
Yeah.
And so you'll see that, like I did this, you'll start running or I was training for a half marathon. I was doing great. And then all of a sudden I just completely crashed. Or maybe you'll start a new program like CrossFit and you'll do great for a time and then totally crash because you're constantly outputting when you don't have anything to give. And so a lot of people, when they're saying adrenal recovery, don't exercise at all, like take a break from exercising. And I feel like that's can also be detrimental. So it's like taking the pendulum from one side and swinging it to the complete opposite, right?
Too extreme.
And
Yeah.
yeah, we do this all the time. And so I like that kind of somewhere in the middle. And so doing things like walking and yoga and stretching and not making it a burden on yourself, but, just even 2 or 3 times a week is pretty beneficial.
I think of it as
And you can't
restorative
really,
exercise.
yes, yeah, exactly. And you can't really recover your adrenals if you don't have good blood sugar balance. And it's funny because all this is like all tied together and you can only fit so much into an hour-long podcast.
Yeah.
But exercise, like if you exercise, it will support your insulin receptivity in the cells for like up to 3 days. And so if you could get some movement in every 2 or 3 days, and that's enough. You don't have to go hard every single day to absolute max to get benefit.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And like I do CrossFit now, and one of the things I do is I scale absolutely everything. So like I don't do burpees, I do box burpees, and I don't do double unders. I just jump rope very slowly. So you just like if you're in a program, you have to not be afraid to set your own standards.
Right. Have your own boundaries and know what your body can do.
Mm-hmm.
Boundaries, right? Like finding that thing and then working towards that. And I think you can,
Yeah,
work towards expanding it on your own pace
sure.
too. But it's important not to try to get to, like you said, the top of the CrossFit thing when you're crashed with your
Mm-hmm.
adrenal system. So you got to slowly work your way back up to these things.
Yep,
Yeah.
for sure.
Okay. I know there's so much more I want to dive into, but you're right. Time runs
I
away
know.
with us. So yeah, are there any other tips that we didn't touch on? Do you want to share for someone who's struggling with their adrenal health that they can kind of take away nuggets for them?
Yeah, so we didn't really dig into like the certain categories of adrenal dysfunction that you could be in, but
Mm-hmm.
just, very briefly, there's a spectrum. So a lot of times people will say, oh, I have adrenal issues. Let me just go grab whatever supplement that my store has that's labeled adrenal
Or that I've
support.
seen on
And that,
Instagram or
yes,
whatever. Right.
exactly. Yep. And so that can be kind of harmful if you don't know where you're at, because
Mm-hmm.
if you're in a situation where you're what I call wired, where you're just kind of like amped up and your output is high and you're going all the time, you can't turn your brain off, that sort of a thing, and you take a supplement that is supposed to stimulate you, you're going to feel a lot worse. You're not going to feel better.
Right.
And so, like within those categories, if you're someone who is wired and you're just kind of always high level, going all the time, you still like have energy, physically, maybe not mentally, but you can keep going. Your brain doesn't turn off when you are going to bed at night. Maybe you're struggling with insomnia, that sort of thing. Then you're going to want to look for things that are very calming to you. And so vitamin C, taurine, there's a product called phosphatidylserine, which is really good. It's very nourishing for the brain and helps to calm you down. Things like chamomile tea or passion flower, lavender essential oil, so things
Yeah.
that kind of put the brakes on a little bit for you. If you're a wired and tired person, so you still have the ability to go, but maybe you're willpowering your way through it. You're just forcing yourself. It's
Gritting
you
your
feel
teeth
tapped
and
out.
moving on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, that sort of a thing. So, and there's a lot more within that, but you're going to be looking at things like rhodiola or schisandra or mitochondrial support. Tulsi as a tea is really helpful there. And then if you're just at the point where you're tanked and you just don't have motivation to do anything anymore, you're just dealing with recurring sicknesses, or you don't want to get out of the house, that sort of a thing, that's where the stimulating stuff kind of comes in handy. And so things like ginseng and some glandulars could be helpful there. Even like cordyceps and B vitamins, ginger
Hmm.
tea, cinnamon tea, those sorts of things. But like if you're pulling in glandulars, you want to make sure that you're not on that for a long time. It's for a period of time for recovery so that you're not becoming dependent on it.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think it's very important. Sounds like it's very important to make sure you know where you're at
Mm-hmm.
on that spectrum, which
Yeah.
is where I think it's very important to get a provider to kind of help you kind of walk through that and know, because it can be difficult to navigate that on your own, especially when you are
Mm-hmm.
stressed and tired and what, all these things. I know for myself, I needed somebody to kind of walk me through it, even though like I know I'm on the other side of it too. I'm a provider for so many people, but for my own self, I need someone else to kind of walk me through that and help me out with the plan. It can
Right.
feel very overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
Um, all right. So I know we're kind of, again, running out of time because I have so many other questions I want to ask you, but um, I know you have a couple different things, but what is the best ingredient to life that,
So yeah, this is funny. I kind of think about this all the time. Like, what is it? Should I work on like digestion, or maybe grounding, or maybe walking, or maybe
mm-hmm,
drinking more water? And there's so many like physical things you can do. But I really think the thing that people should focus on is that your health is in your control. And so there are things that you can do to get better and to find the resources to do that. God is, like I said, God has given you what you need.
yeah,
There's a verse, is it like the king, like they consider it a privilege to search out a matter, right? And so we're supposed to like seek things and pray about it and not really identify with whatever it is that you've dealt it with in your life, whether that's trauma or grief. You're not that person. You're more than that person, and you're
yeah,
more than your illness. So a lot of times people will get like a diagnosis and they'll say, "Oh, I am my diabetes," or whatever.
right, right,
Um, and they'll name it. Like you'll even see people with cancer and they'll like name their tumor, and that's becoming a part of your identity. And it really shouldn't be
yeah,
that you have power over that thing. You are not a victim,
yeah,
and you can overcome it with the right support. So I think mindset.
absolutely. That is so important.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, okay, so real quick, I know we've kind of talked about you have some exciting things coming up for your practice that you're starting to offer. You had a program coming up. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that before we close out?
Yeah, sure. So, I do programs throughout the year, so I always have things kind of going. But the next thing coming up would be the Little Black Dress Project.
Hmm.
And I really like the Little Black Dress Project because at the
A lot
end
of
of the
fun.
project, we celebrate by going out in our little black dresses. And it's a weight loss challenge. I don't really work with people specifically for weight loss very often because of the like mental
Hmm.
hangups that can happen there. So I have tried to like temper this weight loss challenge with a lot of education on functional nutrition spattered throughout it.
Yeah.
But you buy in and we kind of compete over 6 weeks, and then we give out cash prizes at the end. So like last year we ran through it and my winner got $250. So that was really fun.
Fun.
And what it is we do 6 weeks of movement, exercise, try to keep it gentle and eating like nice and clean, getting rid of the sugar. And I specifically run it through this period of the year because it's like when we hit Halloween, it's like candy fest all the way to the end of the year. And then in January, everybody's like, okay, I'm going to start my New Year's resolution. But I'm like, why would you wait till January? So I actually strategically placed this program during this time to keep you on track through the holidays. And like, we'll take a break for Thanksgiving or, maybe a celebration here and there.
Yeah.
But we want you to come back to a place of balance in the middle of it. And it just worked out really well because we have a private group. And so, people can share their struggles with one another and things like that. And you get,
and it's online, right? So anybody
it
can
is
join
all
it.
online.
Yeah.
Anybody can join it. And you get daily. So this was kind of the fun thing that I added to this one is that you get daily beauty tips. And, the idea is to help you to feel like empowered and confident in who you are as a woman at whatever weight you are. And yes, we have these goals, but you are beautiful the way you are. And how can we kind of bring that out and accentuate that in a balanced way, not a narcissistic way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Celebrating where you're at and who you are and who God has made you to be. I think that's really important at the same time as learning some really healthy lifestyle tips and having fun with friends, supporting each other along the way and then going out in your little black dress at the end of the time. I think that's a great fun thing all around.
Yeah. We had 16 women last year and it was just so much fun. So they actually have asked me to make like a spring counterpart and I have it in the works. We'll see if I can pull it off for 2024. I don't know.
And I know you offer a lot of other options and stuff. And I think you're running a sugar cleanse detox right now, right? And those are, I've done that before and those are great. I highly recommend people checking that out. And then I know you and I are working on some upcoming classes in the future here too, as well. So stay tuned for those. All right. So we're just about to close out, but well, first of all, where can people find you online, Kristen?
Yeah.
Or
so
Austin,
the best,
if they're there.
The best place is my website, forestcreekwellness.com. And when you go on there, there's a book a discovery call and I do free 20-minute discovery calls just to see like what is the best place for you to get started. Because not everyone needs to start with group work and not everyone needs to do one-on-one work. And so what is it that you're struggling with and what direction do you need to go? That's the best place to find me. And then I am on Instagram off and on. Like I'll go in spurts where I do really well and I'm engaged. And then I'll do spurts where I'm like, I absolutely hate social media. So, it's in and out, but I do have a body of work. Excuse me. I do have a body of work there that you can, kind of look at my, history and what things I've put out there.
Lots of great information there. Yeah. So
and then if you're in the
Forest Creek Wellness, right?
Yes, at Forest Creek Wellness.
And then forestcreekwellness.com.
If you're yes, and if you're in the Austin area, I'm in Round Rock, which is north of Austin, and I do in person as well.
Yeah, and that's I mean, I love your online stuff too, but I've always, whenever I can get to Austin, it's so great to do like the muscle testing and things like that, and that's been super helpful. So I definitely recommend that if you guys are in the Austin area, check out Kristen and her place. Yeah. All right. Any last words for us, Kristen, as we are rounding up?
No, I mean, I think that this has been great. I think it is just like a tiny taste, a very high level overview of what things can happen. And I actually, in the new year, I'm thinking about I've done a talk at conferences, just really digging deep into adrenal glands. So I'll probably do a webinar, so just to dig a little bit deeper. But yeah, I appreciate what you guys are doing because I think that people who have this history of struggling with trauma and grief, that this is a missing piece and that it's not always in your head. There's something physiological going, wrong with you, that you can support yourself and have this like broad spectrum support. And I know you guys do a little bit of that.
Really being able to do that as you're setting up new normals and new life and new routines. Yeah, super important. All right. Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I'm sure we could talk for many more hours. But yeah, it's definitely we're
Yes.
gonna be offering some workshops and whatnot in the future. So definitely stay tuned for that. And Kristen, thank you again for joining us today at It's Your Story to Tell.
Thanks for having me.